In a recent post, I wrote about how critically important it is for foreign language teachers working with beginning level students in their first and second year of language study, to devote the vast majority of their in-person, face-to-face classroom time to the development of the skills of listening and speaking. I said that students need to become accustomed to hearing the music of the language spoken 100% of the time in class on a regular basis, even if they're not necessarily understanding everything that's being said. And they need to become accustomed to expressing themselves, even imperfectly, as far as grammar and structure is concerned, but expressing themselves on a regular basis, conveying meaning, even though it's structurally imperfect. This needs to happen on a regular basis in the course of that first year of study, or from what I've observed, that will never take place. So the first year of study is critically important because the student becomes accustomed to hearing the language spoken and to expressing himself or herself, and gains the confidence that they actually can communicate in the target language, that it's feasible. Additionally, the first year of study is critical because the teacher, by means of the mode of instruction being used, will be training the student's mind as to how to think as the student is speaking the target language. If the teacher is expressive, uses gestures and mime and role play and images and sound to convey meaning in a visual and auditory fashion, with no recourse whatsoever to the printed word, the written word, nor to the student's native language by means of translation. If the teacher can be expressive enough to convey meaning in a visual and auditory fashion, they'll be training the students in that healthy three-step thought process that typifies a native speaker of a language, going from concept to an inner verbalization of the statement one wants to convey to an outward expression of it, as opposed to the five-step unwieldy thought process of the student that must pass his or her knowledge first through the grid of their native language and must envision it in terms of the written word or printed text before translating it into the target language. That unwieldy five-step thought process is really, unfortunately, what one primarily sees in North American language students. And so the first year will make or break a student. And the development of listening and speaking skills is critical. A student needs to become accustomed to speaking the language and to hearing it spoken 100% of the time. And they also must be trained to think in the proper three-step thought process. That's a challenge right now. Now, why is that the case? Well, currently, if you're a public school teacher or a private school teacher, or you are a homeschool co-op teacher, your face-to-face, that precious face-to-face classroom in-person time with students is probably greatly limited, and it's probably going to be greatly limited as we look ahead to the coming school year. You may be in a hybrid situation where you may meet with students only once a week, or at most 3 times a week. And so you have to prioritize how are you going to devote your classroom time, that precious classroom time, as you work with students. How much time can be devoted to the critical oral interaction that needs to happen in the course of the first and second years of study? Well, as if the limitation on our classroom time, face-to-face, in-person with students to develop the skills of speaking and listening, as if the limitation of only being able to meet with them once, maybe twice, or at most 3 times per week, as opposed to previously maybe having been able to meet with them 5 times per week, if that challenge weren't enough, we also must perform, in addition to providing instruction and oral interaction with our students, we must perform testing. Now, testing poses 2 problems. It's time-consuming, and it needs to be authentic. That is to say, one has to be able to carry out the testing situation with the confidence that the results one is getting are authentic, that there's no cheating taking place. And in a remote environment, that's a challenge. First of all, the time-consuming nature. If it's an oral test that one is giving, one must meet with each student individually. If it's a written test, that can be done in a group setting, but written tests by dint of their very nature are time-consuming. And then when it comes to the need to provide authentic testing without the possibility of cheating taking place, the only certain way of doing that, and even that's not certain, but the most likely way of doing that is bringing the testing situation into the classroom and monitoring the test oneself as opposed to doing it remotely. But what's the problem with those two different? What problem does testing obviously present when it comes to being time consuming? Well, it's going to be forcing the time out that should be devoted to the development of listening and speaking, the time which is already at a premium. So I'd like to share with you the solutions that the ULAT is coming up with to help provide secure testing opportunities for teachers as they work with students remotely who are located in their own home. Now, let me show you, as we go to the ULAT website, what it is that we're doing to help ensure the authenticity, the integrity of the testing situation. Here you have the ULAT website, and we'll go to the very first test that exists. We'll take the Spanish language and lessons for subscribers. We will go to test number 1.4, lesson 1.4. That's where the first test is located. And if you've used the ULAT before, you know that the tests are located at the end of certain lessons, and that those tests exist in 4 different forms. You see at the top here, test number 1, 2, 3, and 4. If I click here on this link, that will take me, it'll skip past all of the introductory sections of the lesson, the exercises, and go directly to the test. And here you see in section 9, you see that we're in a timed testing situation. So here's test number 1. If I click on this link here, it takes me to test number 2, 3, and 4. So each test at the end of a ULAT lesson exists in 4 different forms. And the purpose for this is it gives the students a chance to practice the test in advance, because we desire that. They're practicing the very skills we want them to be working on. But since there are 4 forms, they don't know which of the forms the test they'll be taking. They can't, in an oral test, they can't simply memorize the responses in advance and thereby not be speaking spontaneously when they actually take the test. And so that's why the test exists in 4 different forms. And at the end of each test, by the way, I'll show you this quickly, a video is provided with the correct answers.
Número 1. Él vive en Detroit. 2. Ella vive en Detroit.
It's a very elementary lesson, obviously. So in any case, that's in a normal situation where there is the confidence that the student is being proctored, monitored at home, and is performing the test with the teacher remotely. Usually I'm talking about working with homeschooled students. No problem whatsoever. But what would keep the student from writing down the correct answers in advance, posting them next to the monitor, and when the teacher selects test number 1, 2, 3, or 4, rather than actually spontaneously speaking the sentence, tú vives en Detroit, ella vive en Detroit, usted hace la cama. Instead of spontaneously demonstrating the student's oral abilities, what if the student is simply reading the correct answers unbeknownst to the teacher off of some paper which is located to the side of the monitor? And to try to counteract that, therefore, we've created secure tests which are only accessible by a person who's a subscriber to the ULAT, who has the status of teacher. So let me show you where those secure tests are located. If you go to the top of the section that contains the 4 different tests, you see off to the side here an image of a teacher teaching, and then a prohibited sign, this little symbol right there in the corner. If a student clicks on this image, it will take them nowhere. They'll be told that this information or this content is outside of their membership level. However, if a teacher, a person with the membership level of teacher using the ULAT clicks here, it takes them to a table of contents where there are links to all of the different secure tests on the ULAT. And so let's look at 1.4. This is the lesson we were inside. I'll click here. And now we see there are, again, 4 different tests located, but these are tests that the students cannot see in advance and therefore can't write down the correct answers. When the student is actually being tested, he or she is seeing this test for the first time. Now, what I should mention is these tests are very similar to the practice tests that they were able to access, but they're different enough that nothing can be written down in advance. And so the student, it's a time situation, by the way. I start the clock here. The 60 seconds begins counting down right there. And the student has to say, tú haces la cama, tú escuchas música, yo digo hola, etc. Okay? Well, that type of secure test exists both for oral testing as well as for written testing. So those, in any case, secure tests exist both for the spoken language as well as for the written language. The spoken ones are absolutely secure. The written ones need certain guidelines or limitations to ensure that students not access other resources. But the providing of secure testing formats outside of the classroom so that students can be tested remotely is critical so as to protect that all important in-class time for the development of the skills of speaking and listening.